The RCMP is starting to collect data as part of a pilot project to address policing practices in racialized communities. The program will focus on how the National Police Force interacts with Black, Indigenous, and other racialized groups. The initiative was launched earlier this week in select communities across the country after 2 years of consultations. The Mounties say they will gather and analyze their findings over the course of a year before releasing them to the public. For a closer look at this pilot project and what it could mean for policing practices in racialized communities, we'll speak now with Temitope Oriola. He's a criminology professor at the University of Alberta, and he specializes in police reform, but he's joining us today from Istanbul. So thank you for making some time for us. We do appreciate this.
My pleasure. It's great to be with you.
What do you think is motivating the RCMP here to launch this race-based data collection campaign now?
Well, first of all, I wish to acknowledge that this is a step in the right direction, and I sincerely believe it is the right step. Nonetheless, it is a baby step, one that has to be juxtaposed with existing realities in terms of what we know vis-a-vis police use of force, deadly shootings by the police, including from a database maintained by your organization, the CBC. The evidence is very clear and incontrovertible, and that is the massive overrepresentation of individuals from minority groups in Canada. But in terms of what has motivated the RCMP to do this, it's important to note that the RCMP is now finally trying to be at the level where some of their global counterparts got to back in the 80s, 1990s, and early 2000s. And I say that without any scintilla of exaggeration. This was long overdue. And perhaps there have been certain intricacies or intrigues within the organization, but I also know that there's been a level of leadership change, but also public pressure from community groups and advocates and so forth. And quite frankly, the evidence is quite clear regarding the salience of collecting this kind of data. Now, what we do know is that change rarely comes from within police services. It often has to come from outside, from policymakers, elected leaders, advocates, and NGOs, and so on and so forth. But regardless of the impetus behind the collection of race-based data by the RCMP, I think it is a step forward, but it's important to ensure that these doesn't become an exercise in performativity. It matters what we do with the data moving forward.
And what would you like to see the RCMP do with the data moving forward?
Well, first of all, when the data does come in, it's important to analyze and distill the findings into their most elemental dimensions. What does the data speak to? Who are those being overrepresented and where? What proportions of such individuals represented in the broader community, say in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, and wherever the RCMP is piloting this project. Now, beyond analysis, beyond the paper trail and so forth, there has to be a further step, and that is crafting policy measures and ensuring accountability and transparency. So they do have to share the findings from this pilot project and similar exercises nationally. And also let us know what they intend to do with it. My expectation would be that informs police policy and practices. That is the minimum threshold for this to be worth a taxpayer dollar.
What about the people, the communities that they're serving here, that the RCMP is serving? Because there was a federal government report in 2020 that showed that 1 in 5 Black and Indigenous Canadians had little to no confidence in the police. So how is that going to be a barrier for the RCMP as well?
That's a great point. It is an unfortunate slice of reality. The evidence is very clear, regardless of what jurisdiction you're looking at within the Western Hemisphere, at least. That evidence does show that individuals from minority communities tend to express less than positive perceptions and experiences with police services. Now, that, of course, varies proportionally depending on what police service you're talking about and where they operate. Now, the rating of the police services in Canada tends to be higher relatively when compared to some of their peers in the United States, for example. But more to your question, I think that the idea of a collection of race-based data is one that has been pushed forward for a long time by a lot of minority communities in Canada. So that is likely to be a welcome development. And the expectation being that finally the RCMP would come to terms with some of what members of some of these communities have been saying for some time. But beyond that, I think that we are going to now have a very strong official evidence about number of police stops and searches and seizures, arrests, and so on and so forth. And then make sense of the dynamics, of the dimensions. And again, my hope would be that beyond that analysis, that we then act on those findings. But this is something that I imagine would be well received by minority communities.
Okay, we're going to leave it there for today, but we do appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
University of Alberta criminology professor Temitope Oriola.